Hey, you know, something's been kind of bouncing around my head lately.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
It's this puzzle, right? You hear China saying it doesn't kneel, especially not to the U.S. with all the trade tension and tech stuff, standing tall on the world stage.
Right. That's the official line, the projection of strength.
Exactly. But then you see these other things like stories, even videos sometimes, of people actually kneeling inside China.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that contrast is definitely something that jumped out from the sources we looked at. It's pretty stark.
It is. So it's like, wait a minute, how can both be true? You've got this strong China not kneeling message internationally.
And then this very different, almost jarring picture of citizens kneeling domestically, often to like local officials or police.
Yeah. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk. So we've got these two threads. One is that whole official stance, confidence, economic muscle, strategic independence, all that, mainly aimed at the U.S.
And the other is these observations of kneeling within the society, usually in pretty desperate situations, it seems, like trying to get unpaid wages or seeking leniency, maybe when other channels haven't worked.
So that's what we want to unpack today, this contrast, why the defiant, no kneeling talk globally, but then this other reality internally, what's behind it.
Sounds like a good mission. It definitely touches on culture, politics, economics, lots to dig into.
Okay, so let's start with the big picture first, this China not kneeling on the global scene. What's the context there?
Well, like you said, it's largely framed as a response to external pressure. And the U.S. is definitely front and center there, the trade friction, those tariffs.
I saw mention of a potential 145% tariff in the sources. That's huge.
Yeah, exactly. And the tech restrictions, too. So in that light, China not kneeling comes across as, a statement of defiance. We won't be pushed around.
Right, like bring it on, we can take it. And, they do have reasons to feel somewhat confident, don't they? Their economy is massive.
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge part of the story they tell. Second largest economy globally, what was it, around $18.3 trillion GDP projected for 2024.
Wow.
And their own domestic market is enormous. Chinese consumers themselves drive a lot of their economy, maybe 55-60% of GDP, something like that. Plus, they're still the world's factory, right? Making roughly 30% of global manufactured goods.
So they've got scale. And they're pushing hard on tech, too, aren't they? I remember seeing things about electric vehicles and making their own chips.
That's right. They're way ahead in producing new energy vehicles, over 60% of the global total last year. And even with all the restrictions, companies like SMEC are making strides in semiconductor manufacturing, trying to become less reliant on others.
Okay, so they've definitely got strengths. But this whole not kneeling stance can't be entirely smooth sailing, can it? Those U.S. tariffs, the tech blocks. That has to sting a bit.
For sure. It's not just bluster. There are real constraints and costs, those tariffs and trade barriers. The IMF thinks they could shave maybe 0.6% off their GDP growth next year, and export growth is expected to slow right down, maybe just 2%.
Ouch.
And the tech side is critical. Not getting those really advanced lithography machines like from ASML in the Netherlands, that really hurts their ability to make the most cutting-edge chips.
Ah, yeah, those are the super complex ones, right?
Exactly. And you're also seeing companies thinking about diversifying their supply chains, moving some production to places like Vietnam, that whole friend-shoring idea. Plus, there's geopolitical stuff, AUKUS, the Quad, even the EU putting tariffs on Chinese EVs now. It's coming from multiple directions.
So it sounds like they are in a bit of a tight spot. It makes you wonder about this phrase in the analysis, no space to kneel. Is that really about strength, or is it more like they feel backed into a corner with fewer good options?
That's a really good way to put it. The analysis we saw suggests that while they still have options, they're becoming more limited and potentially more costly. They could, maintain the hard line. They could seek some limited compromises, or maybe even a bigger deal, though that seems less likely right now. Each path has significant economic trade-offs.
And it's not just us talking about this. Big investors, global institutions, they're watching closely too, right? I think Ray Dalio was mentioned.
Yes.
And the IMF.
Definitely. Ray Dalio, for instance, voiced concerns about how these kinds of tariffs could disrupt the whole global economic system, especially for export-heavy economies like China's. And yeah, the IMF has trimmed its growth forecasts. Consultants like Deloitte also point to this challenging external environment. It's a complex picture projecting strength while navigating some serious headwinds.
Okay. So that's the international side, projecting resilience, facing pressure, maybe having fewer options than they'd like. But then, let's pivot. What about inside China? these examples of people kneeling. It feels like a totally different world.
It really does. And some of the examples are quite striking, aren't they? People kneeling to city management officials, the Chengguan, or to public security, the Gongan, and those heartbreaking cases of workers kneeling just to get paid wages they're owed.
Yeah, it seems like it happens when people feel they've hit a wall. Like it's the absolute last resort when the normal systems, whatever they are, haven't worked.
Right. And the sources try to unpack why this might happen. They look at it from a few angles: psychological, even physiological, cultural, social.
Okay, let's break that down. Psychological. What are the ideas there?
Well, one concept is learned helplessness. The idea that if you repeatedly face situations you can't control or change, you might eventually just stop trying. You become passive and accept it, even if it's harmful.
That's pretty bleak. If you feel like nothing you do makes a difference.
Exactly. And related to that is maybe this idea of internalized authority. In a system with strong top-down power, people might come to see authority as absolute. And obedience, even kneeling, feels like the only or the safest response.
Okay. And physiologically, how does the body come into it?
Well, think about chronic stress. Constantly being under pressure, feeling powerless. That can elevate stress hormones like cortisol. And that, in turn, can actually impair cognitive function, decision-making. It might lead to developing these kinds of fixed behavioral patterns, like kneeling, as a way to try and de-escalate conflict in the moment, even if it doesn't solve the root problem. It's almost like a survival reflex kicking in.
Wow. Like a physical response to that feeling of being trapped.
Mm-hmm.
And culturally, I guess things like Confucianism come into play.
That's definitely part of the discussion in the sources. Confucianism's emphasis on hierarchy, social order, respect for authority. That historical and cultural background could certainly influence how people interact with power today. And the current power structure might reinforce those kinds of top-down dynamics.
Right. And then there's the social aspect, like the systems themselves. If there aren't good ways for people to complain or get problems solved.
That seems crucial. If the formal complaint systems or oversight mechanisms are seen as ineffective or maybe even biased, people might feel they have no official avenue left. And if there's also potential for abuse of power by some local officials or enforcement,
then kneeling might feel like the only way to get any attention, however humiliating it is.
Precisely. Which leads to this really interesting, kind of provocative idea in the sources. The notion of kneeling to the wrong object.
What does that mean exactly?
The argument is that it's not necessarily that kneeling itself is absent in the society, but that it's directed primarily towards power, towards authority, towards the state apparatus.
Rather than towards maybe principles, like truth or faith or morality, or even just basic human dignity.
Exactly that. The sources talk about a kind of institutionalized one-way kneeling. Reverence flows upwards to the party, to officials, to the system. But there isn't necessarily that same expectation of kneeling, metaphorically speaking, towards conscience or justice or universal values.
And the media plays a role here too, doesn't it? This idea of selective kneeling in the narratives.
Yeah, like those examples of, say, disaster victims being shown thanking the leaders profusely, or the constant emphasis on gratitude towards the state for providing things.
You do have to wonder how much of that is genuinely felt versus, well, expected or even coerced.
That's a really critical question. Is it authentic gratitude, or is it more like a performance required by the circumstances? And another angle the sources explore is this psychological mechanism of kneeling for security. In an uncertain, potentially intimidating environment, showing deference, even extreme deference like kneeling, might feel like a form of self-preservation.
Like if I make myself small, if I show submission, maybe they'll leave me alone, or maybe I'll get what I need. It ties back to that learned helplessness idea again, doesn't it?
It really does, but maybe on a broader societal level. And think about this. If the dominant value system emphasizes deference to authority, what happens to those who might feel the need to kneel for more abstract concepts?
Like kneeling for freedom of speech, or for justice in a specific case.
Exactly. In a system that sort of monopolizes the value scale, that kind of kneeling might not even be understood. It might be dismissed or even seen as subversive because it doesn't fit the established hierarchy of what's considered important or acceptable reverence.
You know, going back to the China not kneeling slogan internationally, I wonder how much of that is also driven by historical memory. That whole century of humiliation narrative.
That's a really important point raised in the material. That historical trauma of foreign domination could absolutely fuel a very strong, almost visceral rejection of anything that looks like subservience on the global stage, a kind of collective never again.
Or Flipping it around, maybe there was just so much kneeling historically to emperors, to officials, that there's now a kind of defensive reflex against any form of kneeling.
That's another plausible interpretation mentioned, a reaction against a perceived excess of subservience in the past. And we see some writers mentioned in the sources, like Lu Zongjing, describing citizens almost like passive chives harvested by the system, or Hu Xingdu talking about the struggles of vulnerable groups and the deep need for systemic reforms.
Yeah, those perspectives really seem to underscore the internal power dynamics and the sense of powerlessness that might lead to some of the kneeling we see.
They definitely offer critical perspectives on the social contract, or lack thereof, and the pressures faced by ordinary people within the system.
So wrapping this up, it's this stark contrast, isn't it? The official narrative. China stands tall, China doesn't kneel, especially when facing international pressure, driven by economic factors, strategic aims.
Right. But then domestically, a different picture emerges. Citizens sometimes resorting to kneeling, often out of desperation, facing power imbalances, maybe lacking effective ways to seek redress.
And the core idea that seems to run through the analysis is, maybe it's not whether people kneel, but who or what they're kneeling to. This idea of potentially misplaced kneeling.
Exactly. Kneeling directed towards immediate power or authority figures, perhaps because the space or even the conception of kneeling towards higher principles, truth, justice, conscience, is limited or suppressed. It's rooted in this complex mix of history, culture, and the current system.
It really leaves you with a challenging thought, doesn't it? If a society or the people within it feel they lack the right, or maybe even the vocabulary, to kneel to ideals, to truth, to self-reflection, does that loud insistence on not kneeling to outsiders end up masking a different kind of deprivation? Maybe a deeper fear, or that historical trauma we talked about, perhaps a lack of those very values that might inspire a different, more meaningful kind of reverence.
That's a powerful question to end on. What does it truly mean for a nation or an individual to stand tall? And is there also a place for kneeling, not out of fear or desperation, but out of conviction, reverence, or humility towards something greater than oneself? It really pushes you to think about the deeper meaning of strength, dignity, and values. Definitely something for you, the listener, to mull over.
And hey, before we forget, got to give a shout out to our buddy Micky.
I love that he's staying true to himself while exploring this new creative outlet. It's inspiring.
Do yourselves a favor and check out Micky's YouTube channel. You won't be disappointed.
We'll drop a link in the show notes so you can easily find it. And hey, if you're feeling generous, give him a like and subscribe. Every bit of support helps.
Absolutely. Let's show Micky some love.
All right, folks, it's time to wrap up this episode of Sip and Talk. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. We love hearing from you. Peace out, everyone. Until next time.